Everybody, come back. I'm Brian Forget, and we're jumping back into our intro to networking. Today, we're going to answer the question, how do you read a running configuration? Short version is running configuration on most switches and routers is going to be basically a text file with a bunch of commands in it, maybe some helpful stuff up at the top. And those commands are either going to be something that somebody like you typed in or default stuff. I think you're going to want to know more. So, hey, maybe hit that like button. Hey, maybe subscribe and stick around to find out. Do 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 diddly do 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 diddly do 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 diddly do 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 do. Let's get into it. So, if you were here last time, maybe there's a link. We talked about the difference between a startup config and a running config. Startup config is saved to some little internal drive and gets loaded when that thing gets started up. Running config controls how a switch or router is operating right now, at least for most vendors. So most vendors follow what I think of as sort of the Cisco style of handling things here, with this idea, like we said, of a running configuration. Some notable examples of ones that don't would be Juniper. They definitely have a configuration, but there's the committed config and candidate configurations. Different but similar. And the open source Sonic solution and NVIDIA's version of Sonic also instead use commands to control basically a JSON file instead. So those are some examples of things that aren't. But let's get into things here. So I think time for Tiny Brian? Tiny Brian! Yeah! Okay, here's what I got going for you. I have set things up over here in GNS3. And what I've got is a virtualized environment here, but an old Cisco router operating system. I've also got this Dell OS 10 Layer 3 switch and Dell Enterprise Sonic. So these were all from various sources. This OS 10 is still available. You can head out to their site and grab it. Great opportunity to learn. Very Nexus-like kind of command line. This Enterprise Sonic thing used to be up on their website for anybody to grab, but looks like they changed their policy since then. So this is an older one. It's fine. All right. The reason I've got these set up here in this sort of classic access, distribution, and core scenario is so that we can look at the running configurations of these three different devices, router, layer 3 switches, and compare what's there and kind of make sense of their running configuration. So first, I'm going to start with this R1, this Cisco router here, and I've got the command line up here. Just pressed enter a whole bunch to clear out the last things I had on the screen before this. And I'm going to do a show run. Now, I could hit tab, see the whole thing? The running dash config, but show run would have been plenty. And it pops up and gives me about 20 or so lines, depends on the exact operating system, of that running configuration. And then it just says more. If you see that, yeah, go ahead and tap the space bar for about another 20 lines. Or if you just want one line at a time, enter. This would be the same for any of these operating systems. The classic thing you might do here is just space, right, till you get to the end. Okay, and now I'm just going to scroll back up to where I started. There we go. There's my show run, building configuration, and notice we're seeing lines of text here, and then we see these exclamation marks. So a lot of different operating systems will do this. Exclamation mark within the running config can be like a comment sometimes, or it might be like an exclamation mark and then a line of text. And then if that's the case, it's not at all part of the running config. In a lot of cases like this, though, it's just there for readability. That exclamation mark, not doing anything. It's just so it's not one giant block of text. Trying to be nice to you. Okay, let's keep going. This running configuration from this old Cisco router OS, like many others, will often has a little bit of helpful stuff at the very beginning. So here we go. Version 12.4. That's not part of the running config or anything, but it's just letting me know that that's an old iOS 12.4. Yeah. Okay. Now, as we look through this, you can basically assume for any of these Cisco style running configurations that someone has typed a config first, or config T, to get into configuration mode. And then these are just literally commands someone might type. So service timestamp debug date time m seconds. Yeah, that's going to be a default command, but that's a valid command someone could type from global configuration. So all the beginning here, this is just stuff that was typed into global config or that's there by default. If we move down from there, you're likely to see something like interface. Interface fast Ethernet 0/0, or interface gigabit Ethernet 0/0, or interface Ethernet 2/1. These are all ports on this router. Now, this is a pretend chassis router that would have a bunch of line cards. In this case, the, let's say, fast Ethernet 0/0 is an Ethernet port that would be on the supervisor module. Different operating system vendor might call it RPM, route process module. It's the brains of some chassis switch. And so that fast Ethernet 00 is a built-in NIC on there. And that is like a management, basically. It's a port for managing the router as opposed to something you're going to send traffic, let users talk. Moving on down, interface gigabit Ethernet 1/0. That's going to be that first line card, and it's the first port on it. Cool. Now, why am I talking about this? Because these interfaces that are ports on that switch, when it says something like interface gigabit Ethernet 1/0, whatever follows directly after that is the configuration for that port. Yeah, so a lot of times, if you've got a running configuration that someone's handed you and you're trying to help them make sense of it, look up at the top. Look to see if it tells you like the switcher router model number, the operating system number. You might even on some have something like, last updated, like the last time someone made a change to this thing, on a date and a time. Yeah, those can be really helpful little notes from the vendor or whatever up at the top of the running config. And then from there, move on through. A lot of times you'll see, well, there's a router, so you're not going to see VLANs here, but a lot of times on a switch, you'll see VLANs that have been configured up at the top, maybe port channels that have been configured up at the top. And then after that, likely you'll see ports that have been configured. And so if you know, let me pick something up here. Just one of mine. Ha! If you know that you've got something plugged into this port, whatever that is, it's literally too close to my head to see, but that's probably like port 37 or something like that. That's the port that you're trying to configure. Oh, okay, well, cool. I can get my running config and scroll down until I get that port number and see how it is configured. Yeah. Okay. So for instance, on this one, gigabit Ethernet 1/0 doesn't seem to have much configuration on it. This is more of a router thing than a switch thing. It has sub interfaces though configured on it. This 1/0.10, 1/0.20. It's a router thing. And this is a way of essentially putting VLANs on those ports, on that one port, and also putting IP address. Okay, and so this port here, this Ethernet 1/0, has two sub-interfaces configured on it, 1/0.10 and 1/0.20. 1/0.10 is this encapsulation.1Q10. That means it's tagging VLAN 10 on there. And that it's got this IP address of 10.0.10.1. And a network mask 255.255.255.0. And interface gigabit Ethernet 1/0.20 is encapsulation.1Q20, and IP address 10.0.20.1, 255.255.255.0. And so that is an IP address essentially on that VLAN on this port as well. And so that's how this port right here in our GNS3 diagram anyway is configured. That's that port. That's that interface gig 1/0 with the interfaces on. Now in my diagram, I've got that listed as untagged 1 and tagged 10 and 20. I don't actually have an untagged VLAN on this R0, but 10 and 20 are tagged on that. I'm going to come down here to this OS10-1, and let's take a look at its running config. Do you remember how? Yeah, show run. Boom. Okay, and just like before, check it out here. I can see up at the top that there's some friendly, helpful stuff. In this case, this different vendor, this different operating system has got my version there for me, and last configuration changed at whatever date on there, and commented out, right? A little bit different, but really similar. Just like before, I got more. How do I make it go another 20 or so lines? Spacebar. Do I want just one more line at a time? Enter. And you can sit there and just enter through or spacebar through and stare at it. But again, usually for me, I'm just going to lean on that spacebar for a second. Now, before we even look at this some more, I want to show you something else. I'm just going to press enter a bunch, clear my screen a little bit, and I'm going to do a show run again. But this time I'm going to do pipe. For me on my keyboard, it's shift and that button just above the enter key, that vertical line. And this totally comes from Linux. But most switches and routers will have this pipe as an option as well after show command. And then I can hit question mark. Question mark is always your best friend on switches and routers. It didn't actually show up on my screen here because this operating system is a little bit weird. I typed it, but it doesn't actually show on the screen. But it shows me what I could do next. And it says I can do show running config, pipe display XML, accept, find, grep, no more, and save. And like I mentioned briefly before, this idea of a pipe command, it's borrowed over from Linux. Yeah, if you have been a Linux admin or you've got a Linux server or something, or heck, you've even just been looking around and seen some commands, there's a decent chance that you saw some command that then had a pipe and then more typed in after it. Because the idea in Linux would be you run some command and then a pipe and then the second command, and it basically takes the output of the first one and passes it to the second application. Probably the most common thing you would do with that is grep in Linux. Global regular expression, and it lets you filter the output of something. So maybe like dmessage, pipe, grep, and then today's date. And that would, on a Linux system, run dmessage, go look at like basically show me the system messages, but then the pipe grep and today's date would be like, okay, but only show me the ones that include this bit of text that's today's date, so it's only seeing today's stuff. Cool. Basically the same idea here, but more limited. So in this case, show running configuration pipe, and then feed that output to something else, like grep. Yeah, on most Cisco gear, I would expect to have include there instead of the word grep. The same thing though, basically the same thing. This one totally actually lets you use regular expressions, but most people just type in text. And on most Cisco-y things, include, you just type some text there, and it's going to say, give me whatever output, but only show me the lines that match against this text. Okay. But that's not what we're here for right now. We're here for no more. Yeah! Show running config pipe. In this case, no more. What do you think will happen? It won't show as the little more prompt. Instead, just dumps the whole thing for me. All right. Some operating systems will have that. It's really worth it, especially if you have a giant running config. I've seen running config that are literally thousands of lines long. I think it's annoying hitting that spacebar. All right, so look for something like that. Okay, and now I'm just going to scroll back up a bit. Where did it start? There we go. I'm in putty kind of scrolls in chunky ways, but that's okay. Here's that top, just like we looked at before. It's giving us some helpful things at the top. This is OS 10.6.0.1, last configuration change then. Okay, some global configuration stuff. I'm not going to get too lost in the weeds here. We're just looking at how to look at a running config, not to configure these exact things. But this is stuff that would be, again, like, you type config or config terminal, and these are commands directly from there. And then we've got things, whatever these port groups are. We're configuring something on port group 1/1/5. That it's mode ETH 100 gig -1x. Cool. Well, that mode ETH 100 gig -1x, that's like a sub command of this port group 115 thing, right? Or coming down to here to this port we care more about, our OS 10-1, this port right here that's going back up to our Cisco R1, well, that is going to be our ETH 111, interface Ethernet 111. So, real quick pause to talk about the ports. This is calling it interface Ethernet 1/1/1. Back over on the Cisco, it was calling it gigabit Ethernet 1/0. Every switch or router gets to decide how it wants to talk about its ports. If it wanted to call it Raphael, okay, I guess that one's Raphael, right? Usually it's a numbering system, and it's going to be meaningful in some way. Back on this Cisco router, in this case, it's a big chassis thing with line cards, and this is line card number 1, and it's the first port on it. In this case, they call that 1/0 and start numbering the first port at 0. Not as common. In a lot of cases, it'll start at 1, but on this one, they said 0. Back over on this particular OS 10-1 here, its first port in this case is Ethernet 1/1/1. It's not a chassis. Doesn't even do stacking. There's not even any add-in modules. This thing just always thinks of all of its ports as being 1/1/ whatever its first port number, in this case anyway. So Ethernet 1/1/1, yeah, that would be the first port on the switch. And then the next one is 1/1/. Okay. So different devices can call their ports whatever they want. In this case, 111 is the first port. Okay. And on here, this is our configuration. And again, everything is either something that somebody typed in or was there by default. In this case, we've got no shutdown. Shutdown means turn off the port. No shutdown means remove the shutdown. Different vendors will basically have different ways of showing that. I got a bias. I really like it when no shutdown is in the running config, but also shutdown is in the running config, right? Whether you've typed one or the other, it's in there, because now I know, hey, that port is working. No shutdown. But you just kind of got to know for your exact switch, is that included? If it doesn't say anything about it being shut down, does that mean it's on? It's working. Yeah, so you got to know the default and then understand how it's changed. In this case, no shutdown is there. It's switch port mode trunk. That's allowing for more than one VLAN, as many as you want tagged and a single untagged. This one's a little bit weird in switch port access VLAN 1 is how it defines the untagged trunk port. Don't worry, it's just weird. Switch port trunk allowed VLAN 10,20, that's the tagged VLANs for that port. And this flow control receive off is something else. But this is how that port is configured, right? And so this is the rough idea. You go through the running config, check at the top, see what there's some useful information up there about what kind of switch this is, or the last time it was changed, the version of the OS, whatever, right? Scroll down to the piece of it you start to care about and look to see what's there. Well, I mentioned earlier that like on a switch, you'd usually see the list of VLANs that have been created. Here we go, 1, 10, and 20 exist on this one. And you might even look through to see if there's other things. Now, this one doesn't have a ton of configuration on it either. Hang on a second, I swear. Yeah. But there's some global stuff like spanning tree being configured. So we can see what version of spanning tree is on here and anything else that's been configured there. Now, we haven't gotten into it yet, but if you had a routing protocol set up like OSPF or BGP, there would be basically a section in the running config for that. It would say something like router OSPF1 or router OSPF, and then nothing. And then the commands just under that would be the OSPF configuration. So basically, I like to think of a running configuration almost like stanzas of a poem, right? Or paragraphs in an essay or something like that, right? You want to go to the piece of it you care about and read the details of that. And if there's no details about that in your essay, right, stanza in your poem, right, if it's not there, well, then it's not in the running config. There's nothing in this running config about OSPF, because I didn't configure OSPF. Yeah, there's something in here about spanning tree because I configured spanning tree, and this is the way I configured it. Okay, and let's look at that last one here, this Enterprise Sonic one. Oops. Come on, hands. Okay, cool. And I'm going to do a show run again with that pipe, and we got a no more on this one as well. Press enter. Come on, friend. There we go. Cool. And it dumped the whole thing out for me. Now, this one, part of the reason I showed it is just to show more operating systems, but also this operating system shows a ton of default stuff in the running configuration. I did not configure anything on here about policy map out of band QoS policy type QoS. I didn't figure anything about COP system ICC or COP action. All of that stuff is default stuff. And so one of the things you got to be a little bit careful about when you're looking at different switches and routers is that, again, it's almost like there's a personality. Like, it can be tricky if you're looking at a bunch of new stuff all the time. But if you end up in that job that has those exact network switches, right? Like whatever it is that your business, your agency, whatever, has already bought and installed, you're going to kind of get an idea of the personality of those things. Do they include a ton of default information they're running? Is the running config basically empty unless something's been configured? I've seen both, right? In this case, there's a ton of default information here. In fact, in this case, In all three of these, in fact, we've seen a ton of information on the ports. I've seen some running configurations where if you didn't configure anything on the port, it just doesn't even show up on the running config. Not until something's there. So again, different switches are different. In this case, there's a ton of default configuration that shows up in the running config. Okay, so I'm going to scroll back up to the top. Here we go. And like I said, I always like to look at the top first to see, what kind of notes are in here that might be helpful. Not a lot of helpful, like, here's your version and whatnot on here, honestly. But I can see here the host name listed off there, a bunch of default stuff. And this is one of those situations where, like, okay, maybe you kind of stare at it and start scrolling down to see, okay, where's the stuff I care about? Hey, looking at this. Interface Ethernet 1/1. That's the first port on this switch. It's just always ETH 1/something. And in this case, 1/1 is the first. Okay, so here's the configuration I've got for that port, interface ETH 1/1. Set a description on here. Descriptions don't do anything. But generally speaking, for any switch or router, if you go to whatever port or VLAN or something and type description, then whatever words you type next will show up in the running configuration there. And it's just a note to you or to whoever else looks at this next. I really like setting descriptions because I like to think about 3 a.m. me or 3 a.m. someone else that might be mad at me later. Figure out like why, which port is the uplink to the OS 10-1. You can do other stuff to figure it out. But it's real nice to have that clue listed off right there in plain text. Descriptions are a good idea. And then from there, this is the rest of the configuration for this port. Some of it's going to be default, some of it's not. Now, you can have a little bit of a clue because, for instance, I haven't configured anything on port 1/2. Right? If you've got some port that hasn't been configured, you can look at that as like an example of what a defaulted configuration port is. Right? So my ETH 1/2 has this MTU 9100, speed 25,000. Unreliable, loss auto, and shutdown. That's the default stuff. And so anything that's different from that up here on my Ethernet 1/1, I type that in or somebody type that in. So for instance, the description, clearly someone typed in, but this MTU and speed and unreliable loss, I don't need to worry so much about those. Hey, look, no shutdown. Okay, that one's shut down and show it as that. And that's default. And no shutdown, it's given as that as well. This one's been turned on. And then here's our VLAN configuration. This one does it different too. And this one, you don't declare a mode. Yeah, that's weird. Don't declare a switch port mode. But then switch port trunk allowed VLAN, list your VLANs, those are your tagged. And then switch port access VLAN. Again, weird like the last one. That's the native VLAN for this port. All right. Yes. Okay. And so, yeah, doing this thing of like, yada, 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 there's this stuff at the top. Maybe I don't care about. Maybe I'll come back and look at it later. But I know I care about this port. Right? Looking to see what VLANs have been created on there. Really useful, right? Is there some spanning tree configuration? That might be helpful as well. Okay, and so here is the thing though. In this case, we've got all of this background default stuff, and it's kind of hard to tell like where in here is the stuff that's not default. And so that's where it comes back into these other options, like we said before, of maybe using that grep to search for lines that match some particular text, or this find. Some operating systems will call it begin, but find or begin would say look for some matching text and skip everything in the running config until you get to there. So for instance, I'm going to show you this find for let's say ETH 1/1. So what I'm going to do is clear this out a little bit. Show run pipe find. And I'm going to say ETH 1/1 and press enter. And what we see is it's still just the running config, but like I implied a second ago, just nailed it down. It's now going to skip everything until it finds ETH 1/1, this text here. Look, there it is, interface ETH 1/1. That line that has ETH 1/1, this is the first line. And then from there, it's going to show me the rest of the configuration after. Right? And so this lets you skip to that part, which can be really useful again. There's a lot of default stuff showing up in there, or maybe you got that like 1,000 long line running config. Again, different operating systems might call it begin instead, but it's the same thing. Okay, I want to show you that grep as well. Some operating systems might call it include. It is really useful, not as much for the running config, but it is really useful sometimes. So I'm going to do show run again, pipe grep. Grep is going to search for the lines that include some exact text. So I'm going to do the same thing again, eth1/1, and I'm going to see interface eth1/1 and eth1/10 and 11 through 19, but not the configuration. Why? Because this shows me the exact lines that include the text eth1/1, but not any of the other lines, right? So come back up here. There it is, eth1/1. There's that line, but not the configuration that's associated with it. Boo. Okay, so this is why I said grep can be useful, but very often not as often with the running config. Just kind of depends. Maybe you do instead something like show run grep user. If you know there's like a, oh, not in this one, the operating systems. Let me go back to this other OS 10. Show run pipe grep. Okay, the reason it might be useful is if the local user accounts you've created are in the running configuration, you just want to see those lines. Okay, well, cool. This shows me all my local user accounts. There's one called Linux admin, the password that's blocked out, and there's one called admin with the password that's blocked out. But in this case, oh, cool. Those are the local users that exist on here because the word user was in the line. Yeah, so that's the kind of thing where grep can come in handy if you know the text you want is definitely included and you want to see the rest of the line. Okay, that's good for it. Go back over here. Other thing in a show run, depends on the operating system, but a lot of times you can say show run and hit question mark and be able to specify something particular within that run you want to see. So for instance, show run interface. Yeah, eth. And this one, 1/1. Cool. And there's my running configuration, but only for interface eth1/1. This is so useful. This is so useful, right? So I always like to look at the running configuration of a port or VLAN or routing protocol before I change it. And so if I know I'm going to go make some change, I'm going to do a show run on that interface or show run on that routing protocol or whatever first to see what it looks like. Okay, that's my baseline. Now I'm going to go make my changes I want to make. Or understand, like, oh, okay, I got VLAN 10 and 20 tagged on here. Maybe that's already good. Maybe I want to add 30. I don't know, right? But knowing what you're starting with is good. And then also doing something like this again after you make the change to know that it took. It's real easy sometimes to type a command wrong. And then something pops up and you just assume it was a message saying, man, I love you. You're great. Everything's working great. But the message might have been, I don't know what thing you just typed because there's like a space wrong, spelled something. So checking the running config of that interface or whatever after is super helpful to confirm you did the thing. Okay, so in this case, show run interface eth1/1. I'm going to do another one. I'm going to do show run, I can do it on here, spanning tree. Yeah. And here's my spanning tree configuration. Spanning tree mode MST. It was just up in that bunch of stuff near the top of the running config somewhere. But hey, spanning tree mode MST is my spanning tree mode. And apparently there's some configuration on port 1/9 that it's a spanning tree port type edge. Yeah, so in this case, it's showing me that the show runs. You might get the same kind of thing for something like, go back here. Again, like show run OSPF or RIP or just BGP, right? To see just that piece of the configuration. Yes. Okay. So, recap time. Don't be intimidated by a running configuration. Again, it's a bunch of commands, and it's some combination of maybe helpful little tidbits up at the very top that are like, hey, here's the version of OS you're running, or maybe the last time it was changed. Maybe. Very likely a bunch of exclamation marks in there just as basically breaking it up, giving you some extra lines to make it easier, a blank text just to make it easier to read. And most importantly, finally, right, commands you typed in or someone typed in or default stuff. Different switches and routers will have different sort of personalities for how much of that default stuff shows up in the running config. versus only the stuff you typed. And it's going to be a little bit of time to figure out your exact switches and routers they look like. And last thing, every time you type those commands, you're modifying the running config. But what happens to the running config when it reboots? Well, last time, it's gone. The startup config is basically a copy of that running config saved to the internal drive. And when that switch reboots, checks the startup config, copies it into memory, and that becomes the new running config. And so always save. Either write memory or copy run start. Depending on your operating system, it's probably going to be one of the two of those. If you're back over on Juniper that does things a little differently, it's likely commit that you're looking for there. All right, everybody, I'm having a great time. I think I'm supposed to remind you to subscribe. Subscribe! Hit the like button. Hit the like button. Tell people about it. I don't know, man. This is fun either way. I'm Brian. I hope you're having a great day. Got it. Running config. Totally makes sense. I'm on board with it. Everything is perfect. Wait, what? Oh, okay, I guess that makes sense. Well, I guess once I report that bug, it'll be easier to read?